Today's show is sponsored by Panoptica. Panoptica simplifies container deployment, monitoring, and security, protecting the entire application stack from build to runtime. Scalable across clusters and multi-cloud environments, Panoptica secures containers, serverless APIs, and Kubernetes with a unified view, reducing operational complexity and promoting collaboration by integrating with commonly used developer, SRE, and SecOps tools. Panoptica ensures compliance with regulatory mandates and CIS benchmarks for best practice conformity. Privacy teams can monitor API traffic and identify sensitive data while identifying open source components vulnerable to attacks that require patching. Proactively addressing security issues with Panoptica allows businesses to focus on mitigating critical risks and protecting their interest. Learn more about Panoptica today at panoptica.app. That's panoptica.app.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well, getting towards the very, very end of July of 2023. August is right in front of us, just 5 months left of the year. Amazing how time flies. Hope everybody's doing well. If you are a regular Sunday Perspective show listener, if you're one of those that always listens on Sundays, this one might be going out slightly late. Where I was staying over the weekend, we lost power, especially lost power on Saturday night because of some storms. So, getting this one out just slightly later, a couple hours later than normal. So apologies if that disrupts your schedule, but hope everybody's doing well. What I want to talk about today is sort of an interesting article that I read from our friend Jamin Ball, a guy who runs Cloud of Judgment, our new friend who really digs into the numbers for us around the cloud and kind of financials around the cloud. And he had an interesting article in his newsletter from about a week or so ago, and it basically was asking, are software companies bad business? And essentially it was an article that was raised by some comments out of the VC community, concerned about, and this was the tech VC community whose lifeblood is based on software. But in essence, it was asking, is software bad business in terms of, from a VC perspective, in terms of how much free cash flow it raises? So meaning, people don't just sign up for the software, but they're actually spending money on the software. And is it a business that you can turn fairly quickly? So they had like sort of three concerns. One was, do software companies generate enough free cash flow? Number two, how quickly do they do that? How quickly do they move from, in essence, giving away not only software, but overspending on sales and marketing in order to acquire customers, in essence, not being profitable, but just sort of burning through VC funds. And third, is the cost of options and equity, so in the form of like options and RSUs, is that too expensive? Does that become too much of a cost? Is it sort of a cost that is sort of hidden? And for those of you that don't know, typically in a sort of software company, smaller company, non-public company, if you will, people oftentimes take a lower than market or, somewhat lower salary in exchange for equity in the company, and equity in the company, while it's not necessarily always vested, at the point where it does start vesting, or maybe even earlier, I'd have to look at the accounting rules. You have to charge that as an expense because, in essence, the idea of it is it will become, part of somebody's salary package at some point in time. So, anyways, those three things sort of got brought up, and Jamin, as he always does in excellent fashion, sort of walked through and said, well, those concerns are fair in some cases, but it can then kind of walk through sort of how software companies are making money and what their balance sheets look like, and sort of kind of took a basket of software companies and said this is the average of what things look like. But anyways, the article kind of got me thinking about the future of software, not so much exactly how everything will get built, but the future of software as a financial entity, software companies as a financial entity. Will they continue to have these sort of great margins and be sort of great companies in some cases, as we've seen in the past? And so what I kind of want to do after the break is dig into, what are some of the future trends that we're seeing, some of the near term and longer term trends that we're seeing, and does software still look like a very appealing business to be in or to invest in. And we'll dig into that after the break. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, what I kind of want to do today is veer off a little bit of an article that was in Clouded Judgment this past couple weeks ago in the newsletter, and dig into, sort of the future of software, not so much, how it's developed. Should it be Java or Rust or some other thing or blah, blah, but really kind of some bigger, more economically driven questions around software, how it's created, how it's delivered, all those sort of things. And, will we continue to see sort of the margins out of the software business that we have seen over the past multiple decades, if you will? And a couple of things got me thinking. So obviously, Jamin's article in Clouded Judgment got me thinking about it. If you are a listener of Stratechery, the Ben Thompson newsletter and podcast that goes out weekly, multiple times a week, Ben has talked forever about software being a very good business, especially over the internet, because the internet and software essentially let you deliver these things for free, in essence. So your delivery of the product is essentially free. It can be scaled linearly depending on what the software is. And basically, it's like once you build the software, every incremental iteration or instance of it that you sell or somebody uses, in essence, is free, right? So all the cost is up front, and then the incremental delivery, distribution, all that stuff is sort of free. So there's been a belief in our industry for a long time that software is a tremendous business. There's good reason to believe that, in that a number of the very successful software companies, whether it's Oracle or Microsoft or Salesforce or any number of companies, Red Hat, VMware, lots of others, have very, very good margins on their kind of cash cow businesses. Hence, software is a very, very good kind of business to be in. And we've seen, more and more value, at least in various parts of the industry, move from, kind of hardware-centric things to software-centric things. We're starting to see hardware come back and be interesting again. But it got me thinking, because some of those models, in terms of, super successful software, some companies like Microsoft or VMware or Red Hat or Oracle or others tended to make a lot of their fortune on premises when you were selling essentially packaged software, that was not delivered as cloud services, right? They weren't SaaS. They were delivered as software that then somebody else had to run and operate. So the cost embedded in operating them was burdened on the customer, wasn't necessarily burdened on the software. They did very, very well on margins. Now we're seeing more and more software be delivered via the cloud, and that starts to get into some very interesting things, right? So the first thing is, if I want to deliver software via the cloud, so in the past, I not only had to build the software, I had to build some sort of like delivery mechanism for the software, which typically was, in essence, a glorified FTP server or some sort of download server. And then I had to, build up sort of a sales and marketing mechanism to let to build awareness in the marketplace and be able to take orders. But I didn't have to operate the software, right? So if, let's say I built a CRM system, I gave you the software to go build the CRM system. You had to buy servers, you had to run it, you had to network it together. All of that burden was on you. Now, if I were to get into doing a new software entity today, so for example, I'm delivering some CRM-like system or project management system, so like Asana or something, before you ever run the software, I have to build the system. I have to build a backend system. I have to build a SaaS service. I have to find engineers, SRE teams, start paying Amazon or Azure or Google a bill, all those sort of things. So while you still can make a bunch of money at being very, very successful, there is a portion of like things like SaaS in which the operational costs are burdened upon you. Now, obviously they can adjust pricing such that some of that's included and so forth, but there's a different pricing model. The second thing that gets sort of interesting is we start thinking about like the SaaS business. And if you think about, who are the biggest, most gigantic SaaS companies there are plenty of names that but they're not necessarily of the order of magnitude of the largest previous software companies that you saw. And what that in essence sort of means is while, so what's the best way to explain this? So if you follow the show for a while, there are plenty of times when we will have startups come on the show. And at times they're really interesting companies. And other times you sort of listen to it and you go, that whole company sounds like one feature, right? Like sounds like one capability, one feature that would have been a feature or a capability of a broader software platform in the past, right? So the thing about SaaS is SaaS has been very good at figuring out how do I take a distinct problem that somebody has that I could either solve with software or, maybe used to be a piece of software that I now want to deliver as a SaaS service because nobody wants to operate it. But SaaS is fairly highly fragmented, right? Fragmented in the sense of like, yes, there are platforms like Google Cloud with like all the docs and things that go along with it, Microsoft Office or Microsoft 365 or Salesforce. But there's also 10, 100 million, 1,000 SaaS applications that do one thing. And there'll be, 25 different ways of doing project management and 25 different ways of doing, creative stuff, whether it's a Canva or an Adobe or somebody like that. And so SaaS is highly fragmented. And when things are highly fragmented, you lose out on the ability to, kind of have pricing power over your customers, hence have greater margins, right? You tend to, when you have lots and lots of options and the option is a, one-off feature, it becomes harder and harder to get great margins for what you're doing. So you have a couple of things that are a little different than the old software business that was high margin. You have to operate it, so that potentially cuts into your margin. And you've got higher amounts of competition because we're not necessarily building platforms. We're building these sort of companies that are one feature or one capability type of thing. The third thing that got me thinking was, we've talked for a long time, and I think I'm going to cover it maybe in the next Sunday Perspective show as well, is, we've gone from the days of, software was this giant multi-million dollar project that also involved consultants that was purchased, entirely by the CIO, right? Or some senior vice president, right? We're seeing, especially with SaaS, more and more things that are bought bottoms up, sort of, this team has a problem. They go out and find a tool and maybe they start off with, free trial, but then eventually they sort of buy into it. But you get more and more of sort of bottom up sort of selling motions, right? And that's fine because, there's times when top down doesn't work, even though they spent a lot of money. There's times when bottom up does work and it grows within a company. Something like Slack's a great example of that. But what gets interesting is as we start to talk about, this sort of AI boom that we're in right now, this AI moment that we're in, whether or not it'll pan out or not, people tend to be fairly bullish on it. But what'll be interesting about it is a couple of things. First is if a lot of the discussion around AI is, does it replace what some human does, some task that some human does, or does it augment what some task or human does? And if you are selling the value proposition of what AI does, at the low level, that works okay because some team or group goes, oh, okay, this is augmenting what we do. But if you're selling that at a high level, you're not going to sell to the CIO that you're sort of augmenting your staff. You're going to sell that you're going to displace some of the staff because the CIO is looking for, CFO is looking for higher level returns, right? Whereas lower level staff people are looking for, how do they increase their own productivity, right? It's the normal kind of yin and yang problem that we have within every organization, which is, the workers are trying to create more value that they drive for themselves, help increase their resume, help increase their ability to make more money. Yes, they're also trying to help improve the business, obviously overall, but management is very much trying to drive profitability, maybe to the behest of, what's in the best interest for workers. And, so there's always a little bit of challenge there. And so software, especially as we get into AI, software in the past had always been about productivity and to a certain extent cost savings, but really a lot of it was around driving productivity. The productivity equation starts to change a little bit. Now, people are going to argue, well, AI is not going to displace jobs or will displace jobs. We're already seeing those arguments out in the marketplace, and we'll see what pans out. But that becomes an interesting thing. The next thing where AI becomes sort of interesting in the software business is, so much of software is priced usually on one of two things. It's per seat. How many people do you have using this software per seat licensing? Or some sort of usage-based pricing, right? So, okay, if you use 50 gigabytes of storage, that's the threshold, and the next one is going to be 200 gigabytes, or so many hours a week of usage of something, or so many transactions or API calls or whatever it might be. What happens when AI comes into play, and AI is not only trying to explain that it could augment what you do, so maybe be more efficient at what you do. Hence, maybe you don't need as many API calls, or you don't need as many transactions or whatever. Or it's potentially going to reduce the number of people that are needed overall. Hence, the number of seats goes down. So it makes it sort of an interesting thing in which, on the surface, AI does this really amazing thing, whatever it might be. But on the flip side, when it comes time to go sell that technology, somebody has to figure out the pricing model. And if you've ever been in the technology game and you think about it in terms of, okay, we have cool technology, but how do we get people to adopt it? And how do we figure out a pricing model that people believe they're paying for value? And you've disrupted the things that people have a sort of a North Star for, seats or usage or something. It may become a little more challenging than people think, right? So, right now we all love ChatGPT because it's, it's free, for example, or maybe it's $20 a month or $30 a month. And so you go, okay, that seems reasonable for me as an end user. But, when you get into things where, for example, Microsoft is talking about Office 365 or 365, having an upcharge of like $30 a month for the AI capabilities they're going to build in, or the Copilot capabilities they're going to build in, then it becomes sort of an interesting conversation of like, well, I understand if I have to pay, let's say $50 a month per user to use the software, right? Like the Office 365 suite. But if I had to pay an additional $30 per month per person, then you start getting into, well, is everybody going to need this Copilot capability? Is it all the value of it equally distributed to everybody? What is it going to do? You get into some just sort of weird or unusual or to be determined pricing capabilities that I think still have to sort of be worked out. And, people will be surprised at how much, I say that should be surprised, but you'd be surprised at how much what seems like interesting technology, and gosh, everybody's going to want this and it's going to make sense to everybody. When it gets to pricing, then it just becomes a different conversation. The next thing I wonder about is, there's a thing that goes on in our industry where we find a buzzword, and everybody loves the buzzword because it makes the case in the near term for what we all are trying to do, which is like, we're trying to be better at building software. We're better at deploying software, and hence, responding to the business and being, adaptive to the market and all those sort of things. And so, obviously there's this sort of saying out there that, every company's become a software company, right? Developers are the new kingmakers. And what's interesting about those two is if you think about those in the sense of software and economics, well, in the past, having great software in your company, right? So there's people who talk all the time about how Amazon's a great company and interesting, logistics company and supply chain company. But, I was listening to an interview recently and somebody said, well, the thing that makes Amazon the company is that they're an amazing software company. The software that they create internally to be able to run their systems is amazing. And being great at software, meaning you're able to hire great developers and you're able to have the wherewithal to create, and disrupt markets through technology is really amazing. But when everybody is a software company and everybody has access to all these things, it does make me wonder, do we start to get into the old Nicholas Carr statement of like, is IT essentially a commodity? Do we really need IT anymore, right? What value does IT provide? It may start to get into the conversation of like, well, if everybody's a software company, does software become a commodity? Hence, is software as valuable as it used to be, or does it deserve as much of a premium as it used to in the past? No, it might, right? It might just become sort of the cost of doing business. But it does sort of, if the goal is to make everybody capable of doing software as opposed to just having IT or just having the internet or whatever it might be, does that bring down over time the margins and the sort of the overall value? Now, can you create, if the market expands, you can make a lot more money, but can you make a lot more money at the kind of margins people were used to? Again, there are grocery stores in every single town. Everybody needs, grocery stores and food and so forth, but grocery stores in general make very low margins because grocery stores have become commodity. Does software eventually go that route? Maybe, maybe not. But it does sort of beg the question of we've created this world in which every company is a software company. Is that really the message we want to get out there to the world, which is, is software any more differentiated versus it's just everybody has it and everybody's a software company and everybody sort of understands this stuff. Now, the other flip side to that is in terms of everybody's a software company, right? Or every startup is a software company. The thing that you do notice working in a startup or having kind of gone through it is the things that you would typically expect to be able to do that are commodity type of things. So like, we need an accountant. We need an auditor. We need, a tax person. Those things don't necessarily scale on the business side of things, right? Like you can't just go like, we'll just get a common marketing service and they'll just do everything for us. Or we'll just get a common, sales service and they'll do everything for us. Those are the things that oftentimes differentiate the business. And, we haven't seen the ability to scale that kind of stuff necessarily happen, right? We see software companies go through CMOs and marketing departments and sales leaders and sales departments all the time because that part of the business is really, really hard. So anyways, talked about a bunch of things, talked about, the fragmentation of the market. Instead of having, more and more new platforms that aggregate things, we tend to be disaggregating software. So does that make it easier or harder to build a highly profitable business? How much will the cost of delivering software as it's changed from things like SaaS and AI start to eat into margins? Have people figured that out? Maybe, but maybe not. As more and more software kind of gets determined, evaluated from the bottom up, how much does that make, the ability to sell really big contracts, high margin contracts possible? Or, if everything is driven by decisions that are at lower levels, does that fragment your ability to sell more software or higher margin software? What role does AI play in this? Does everybody need AI? How are people going to figure out how to put a value around AI? That's going to be an interesting evolution in the market if that becomes sort of table stakes for every software application. And then obviously, as we start to get into, channels for market, if everybody is doing it, does it commoditize software? So, by no means am I trying to state that, software is not going to be good businesses to be in, that software won't be highly valuable. But I think, when we do see even parts of the market, like the VC community, start to question, like, what do margins look like? What, can you build viable businesses? And again, keep in mind that we use the VC community as sort of a proxy for a lot of things. Yes, they put money into the market, but they're not the only source of money into the market. There are plenty of other sources of money into the market. They have very distinct timelines. They expect things to happen. They expect very distinct sort of returns, which sometimes happen, don't always happen. But if they are starting to question it, it does make you sort of go, okay, let's figure out why they're questioning that. But let's also look at some of the bigger sort of macro level things that are impacting software, what's changed over the last 5 or 10 years that might raise concern, but also start to raise the conversation of like, okay, these things are likely coming into play. They're likely becoming the new norms. Again, like whether it's SaaS or whether it's AI or, what will be the role of open source going forward, right? Obviously, it'll be a development model, but is it a monetization model? We've seen, various things happen there. It's worth kind of having the conversation of, will the things that have gotten us here in the past in terms of the software industry, can those things continue? Do they have to change? What are some new ideas people have around them? What are some new business models people have around them? So all those things are floating out there. I think it's an interesting conversation. Would love to get people's feedback on this. Anyways, but with that, I'm going to wrap it up. maybe more open-ended questions this week than sort of definitive answers, but sometimes that's the purpose of the Sunday Perspective. So anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Hope your month's going well. Hope your summer's going well. Hope your Q2 and into Q3 planning is going well, whatever you're working on. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for sending in your questions every week and giving us ideas for new topics and new questions and so forth. And if you have any feedback on this one or any of them, let us know. We are now on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and LinkedIn and all the different places. You can find all the links to it over on thecloudcast.net. If you don't know them already, we are almost always at the Cloudcast.net handle on all those platforms. So anyways, with that, thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow on the show. We're going to wrap it up this week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.